I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you today. We are coming off the election, and let me just tell you, folks, the numbers here at Juno News are spectacular. I want to share a few of them with you because I'm really excited and really proud of what we have built together. I say together because we would not be here without the audience, without viewers like you, without the people who are subscribers to Juno News that pay us $10 a month for all of our news. You're the ones that have propelled this and kept this going. So during the election, during the shortest election that you could possibly have, only 5 weeks, we published 413 exclusive news stories at Juno News. We had 10 million plus page views across social media, so just X and YouTube. Our videos were viewed 14.2 million times. Our newsletter, which we send out every day, was opened 9.1 million times. It was viewed 9.1 million times. And our premium subscribers grew by 30%, folks. So we are so excited to be part of the movement of independent press and independent journalism in Canada. We are on a mission to replace the CBC, and I think we're going to get there. I'm going to ask you just take a quick second and like this video. It really helps us with the YouTube algorithm. But it's not all good news because, as I'm going to report today, Canada has fallen in terms of world press freedom. So you know this and I know this, that Canada is not as free as we used to be. We don't have free speech like we used to. And now it's verified, not by a conservative group. This isn't just a right-wing talking point. This is a factual statement based on the World Press Freedom Index. So to talk about this a little more, very pleased to be joined by my friend Sheila Gunn Reid. Sheila is a journalist at Rebel News, Rebel Media, and she's the president of the Independent Press Gallery of Canada. Sheila, welcome to the program.
Candice, thanks for having me on the show.
Okay, well, I saw this on X and it was really disappointing, but not surprising. So can you walk us through this Reporters Without Border World Press Freedom Index?
Sure. Yeah, the Reporters Without Borders, they put out an analysis of press freedom every single year. And it tracks government overreach, arrests of journalists, violence against journalists, and government censorship. And Canada now ranks 21st in the world with a score of 78.75. Now, the reason this is significant is that this is a huge drop from just 2024. In 2024, Canada was at 14th place. And overall, now this is what I think is really significant, is that, you know, how people used to talk about how mean Prime Minister Stephen Harper was to journalists, but journalists had a really good under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, because we've dropped 13 places since 2015 when the Liberals took power. And that is post the Liberals dumping a pile of money on the mainstream media, bailout after bailout. This is post the government overreach into journalism. So we have to remember Bill C-11 that handed basic control of the internet over to the CRTC, so that's the broadcasting bureaucracy. This is post C-18. C-18, as you know, forced tech companies to bankroll failing legacy media outlets, and that prompted Meta to block Canadian news outright, where a lot of people consumed their news, but also where a lot of independent journalists were seeing their reach grow. And then now we've got Carney threatening to clean up online pollution, he says, is flowing our way from the Americans, which of course is a euphemism for purging any sort of dissenting voices. So this is troubling, and this tracks with exactly the time the Liberals took power.
Wow. I mean, it is scary. And just for that context, right? Like even us at True North, I built a company called True North, and we had a huge audience on Facebook. That was our number one audience in terms of social media. Without warning, they just completely shut it off. We had to migrate over to YouTube, and thankfully we've been able to build up a large audience on YouTube now. But it took a while. It took a few years of catching up. And, you know, again, thankfully we have an email list as well. But if you don't, I mean, it's so easy to get cut off from your viewers. And that's the scary thing, right? Like when you have a government as tyrannical and opposed to basic freedoms as we see with the Liberals, you never know what they're going to cut off next, never know what they're going to do next. I want to read what Mark Carney has to say on Press Freedom Day. So it was on Saturday, and he writes this on X. He says, "A strong, independent and free press both defines and defends our values as Canadians. Now more than ever, we need to protect our public forums and defend strong and reliable Canadian voices." So there's so much you can read into that, Sheila. First of all, As we all know, Mark Carney banned independent reporters from any of his events through the campaign, starting in Edmonton with his campaign launch. He even had the police get involved to do everything they could to stop independent reporters from asking questions. The only time throughout the entire campaign that independent journalists got to ask questions was at that leaders debate, because we had a court order saying that we're journalists and they had to let us in. And now he says, now more than ever, we need to protect our public forums and defend strong and reliable Canadian voices. So all I read from that is he wants more power to shut down his adversarial voices and defend, meaning publicly fund journalism, which is pretty much exactly how we got into this mess. I also want to play from Mark Carney. This was a resurface clip. This came up during the election campaign, April 10th, 2025. And this is a clip of Mark Carney basically saying the threat is from social media platforms. He says that they've become a sea of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate. And he says, my government will act. Let's play that clip.
Large American online platforms have become seas of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate in all its forms. And they're being used by criminals to harm our children. My government will act.
So that's terrifying. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, he says large American platforms, but we know who he means. We know that he means X, which is the one place where people can still freely speak their mind. And it's where a lot of journalists are. So he's going to make sure that the journalists see exactly what he wants them to see. But I also think it's interesting, his focus, right? We know that WeChat meddled in at least the last two elections, and according to the site task force, this latest one, they were using it to target conservative candidates, and yet nary a word about WeChat ever. If you are looking for a social media platform that is meddling in our democracies, targeting democracy voices, targeting Canadians, you would crack down on WeChat. But it's very clear that Mark Carney is insistent on coming down on X. And I'm worried about what that means, because will that mean X is just going to say Canada's just not worth the hassle and not allow access to Canadians? I wonder. We saw what Meta did. Meta said, I'm not going to pay the shakedown. And so now Canadians are not allowed to post news links there. So I wonder what this means for us. But this is, I think, hinting at a renewed Online Harms Act.
Well, it's interesting that they talk, what we think about as free speech, what we think about as independent journalism, they think as like a threat to the democracy or like hate speech. And so they're literally like, I can't imagine Canadian political discourse without Twitter or X. Like I actually can't imagine. So much of the conversation, so much of the dialogue, so much news is broken there. And it's almost like a collaborative forum, right? Like I scroll through X every morning to figure out what to talk about my show. I see, tweets from you or tweets from other people in the space. And that's kind of how I get up to speed into what I want to dig into, what I want to research, what I want to talk about on my show. And the idea that that could just go dark because Mark Carney decides that, it's bad for us is truly, truly terrifying.
Well, and again, look at what Mark Carney's focusing on. Did he say that it was a direct attack on democracy that the debates canceled the media scrums? Actually, he never said really anything about that. He never said, that he never had a problem with journalists having to fight the government to get into the debates. There's no possible way he is completely unaware that his campaign kept calling the police on journalists over and over and over again. And this isn't just targeting right-wing journalists or conservative journalists. We saw Kareem Assad, who I don't really know where she falls down on the political spectrum, and I kind of like it that way. She was basically persona non grata at Carney campaign events, and I don't think that's going to change. We haven't really seen him be open and accessible to independent journalists. They've had to shout their questions the way Chris Stacey has from the street, or Alexa Lavoie last week from the street. I can't imagine that things are going to change for the better.
Well, and it's so tightly controlled. Like, folks might not understand this. Even for the election night, right? We tried to send Sue-Ann Levy. Sue-Ann is a professional journalist, a retired reporter for the Toronto Sun. I believe she wrote for the paper for some 30 plus years, right? She is, by every definition, a mainstream media journalist. Now she works for True North, and they wouldn't let her in. They wouldn't let her in. And it really is like, if you're not part of the government-funded journalist clique, like if you're not part of either the CBC or one of the other outlets that takes money from the government, they literally just won't let you in the building. I mean, it's honestly, it's almost like a communist system, right? They say it's free speech and freedom of the press, but really it's controlled press, because they only let people that they've previously given money to or screened or decided that they're part of the Canadian journalism establishment. They won't let anybody else in. And so it skews everything about Canadian politics. Like the entire election campaign, the narrative was set by the reporters in the room who were asking questions day in and day out. And you exclude half the country by excluding independent press and all of the people who get their news from us. And you're not really fighting a fair battle, because they're fighting the issues. Both Conservatives and Liberals are fighting an election based on the left-wing issues, the issues that the left-wing media decide are the issues. And they're not talking about the issues that we care about and the things that we want to know about, the things that we're uncovering and digging up. And so it's just fundamentally unfair. And it's funny that they don't even recognize that.
Well, I think they do, because I think they know they lose on the issues that normal people care about: crime, housing, immigration, cost of living, inflation. They know that if they are forced to campaign or argue or defend the Liberal positions on those issues, they lose every single time. So how do you avoid talking about that? Well, you just make sure that the people who are going to ask those sorts of questions are no longer in the room. And I think we're also missing a really important part of this, and that is that the mainstream media, the taxpayer-funded, government money contaminated journalists, are the enforcers in all of this, because the government knows they can't enforce this directly a lot of times, because that will result in a charter challenge. But you know who can enforce the exclusivity and the boring questions asked by the mainstream media? Well, that's the Parliamentary Press Gallery. So this is this little cabal of journalists who get together and say, we need exclusive access to these politicians. And so we can't let our competitors come in here and expose us for not doing the job that we're paid to do on behalf of Canadians. So they keep journalists like those at Rebel News out of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. We don't get to ask the politicians questions, and the media continues to get worse and worse and worse. It's like watching it slowly circle the drain of a toilet bowl, because it's just, they keep doing things that reinforce just how bad they are, and the government keeps giving them money, correcting them from getting the, the market correction they so rightly deserve. So, I mean, you have to remember, it's not just the government. There's this cabal of journalists that are acting as enforcers on behalf of the government.
Well, it's so the most obvious, the time that this is the most obvious, I think, is watching the CBC. I don't take any joy in watching the CBC, but when clips circulate, I pay attention. And I want to point to this interview that was done with Andrew Scheer, Conservative MP, and CBC's Power and Politics host, David Cochrane. This happened late last week, where they're talking about monetary policy, right? And sure, there's two schools of thoughts when it comes to monetary policy. There's sort of like the Keynesian liberal idea, and then there's more like the free market conservative ideals, right? So Andrew Scheer is talking about it from a conservative perspective, and David Cochrane is fact-checking him with false information, okay? So this is a bit of a longer clip. It's about a minute long. I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to take a second to just reinforce again why David Cochrane is just promoting liberal ideas. He's lying about what's happened, and he's pretending that he's the arbiter of truth, and he's trying to fact check a Conservative MP. It's really unbelievable. Let's play that clip.
I'm incredibly optimistic about our ability to build off of our gains this time, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to finish the job in the next election.
Right, but your party may not be able to rely on post-COVID inflation crisis that was fueled by, war in the breadbasket of Europe and supply.
David, you know this. You know that inflation is caused when governments print money.
Well,
that's what the Liberals did. The Liberals flooded the economy with brand new cash. It has nothing to do.
They spent money. They didn't print money. The Bank of Canada did not increase the number of banknotes in circulation in the economy. They use settlement balances.
David,
they use settlement balances to buy government bonds to put liquidity. I'm not being dishonest.
They created money out of thin air. They massively expanded the money supply. You know this.
They did not permanently increase the money supply, Mr. Scheer. But anyway, I don't want to have an argument on monetary policy. They use settlement balances to buy bonds, to lower interest rates, to put liquidity into the banking system, and then they remove those settlement balances over time. So,
are you denying that there is more currency, whether it's digital or real, in the Canadian economy today? Are you denying?
I'm saying they use settlement balances, and you're calling it money for. There may be a small marginal increase, but you know, it is not the anyway. Everybody had anyway. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sounded like a debate between a Liberal MP and a Conservative MP over monetary policy, but it wasn't. CBC is actively out there pushing the Liberal line, okay? And it's a distinction without a difference anyway. He's saying, oh, it was these settlements. So basically the idea is, yes, the Government of Canada pushed a whole bunch of money out, but they have a plan to retreat it and pull it out eventually. So it's not the same as printing money, even though it has the same effect as printing money. And that is exactly what has caused inflation. That is what we can all agree on. And it was just so, to me, it was just so icky to see David Cochrane just like really, you know, digging his feet in. And I swear he has Liberal talking points in front of him. He is repeating the lines that Mark Carney and Mark Carney's staff in office gave him to read. So it's like, you know, what's the point of even having Liberal MPs? Why don't we just have CBC journalists debate Conservatives on the issues? The idea that the CBC is any kind of a neutral platform, or the people who get to fact check anyone else, they have absolutely no business fact checking because they don't have the facts on their side in the first place. What did you think of that?
You know, it's as much as I regret having to see Andrew Scheer go through that, it's nice to see that we are not the only people that David Cochrane lies about. As you know, David Cochrane went on national TV and said that Rebel News accreditation had been revoked from the post-debate scrums. That was completely untrue. He maybe wasn't wise enough to keep his powder dry. I think that's what he had hoped his conversations with the Debates Commission would turn into. But I mean, this is what $1.4 billion and a promise to increase CBC funding by $150 million more buys you. It buys you a network that acts as the communications arm of the Liberal Party of Canada. There is absolutely no bias there, and you could tell, you know, like Andrew Scheer, or I'm sorry, there's absolutely no balance there. And you could tell that Andrew Scheer, it's almost as though his audio was turned down so that they weren't actually competing for the same set of ears.
It's so interesting, yes. And our audience will know David Cochrane very well by this point because we showed many, many clips of him during the debates commissions and just the absolute hysterical meltdown that he had. I have one more clip of him, not trying to pick on him, but, well, I kind of am because he's so terrible.
I am.
He was speaking with Globe and Mail journalist Robert Fife. Robert Fife is supposed to be like the grandfather of Canadian journalism. He's the one that gets all the scoops, and he's so stoic. And, you know, a lot of people on the Conservative side like him because he'll break stories. He's an equal opportunist when it comes to breaking devastating stories about Liberals and Conservatives. But here he kind of like lets the mask slip a little bit. He's talking to David Cochrane on the same show, Power and Politics. I don't even want to repeat what he calls Pierre Poilievre. I'll just, you can listen to it for yourself. Let's play this clip.
You have MPs that have told me that they found it really difficult going door to door because a lot of people were saying, we like some of the policies you're doing, but we think your leader's a dick. And we, really. And we think he has, you know, I'm sorry, but that's what they're telling me.
All right. I'm going to have some ombudsman's paperwork to fill out before I go home tonight, I think. But yes, not in such language, but I have heard similar sentiments expressed from Conservative candidates.
So
Okay, so just first of all, the giddy laughing hysterically, right? Again, how are we supposed to believe that this is fair and balanced? This is the state broadcaster. This is why we have to pay $1.5 billion a year to get, first of all, foul language about the Conservative leader. And let me just say to Robert Fife, okay, that is not journalism. You're talking about a second-hand account. He spoke to MPs who said that they were saying at the door that someone else said it. So someone else said it. An MP heard it, an MP passed it along to Robert Fife. He doesn't speak in specific enough terms for me to believe that that is a specific example, like saying, I have a specific example, I have it on tape or something. No, he's just speaking broadly. They're basically just mocking Pierre Poilievre, making fun of him, saying what they all say about him behind closed doors. And it was so shocking not so shocking, but so titillating to the CBC host and the other guests that they couldn't control their laughter. They're laughing like schoolgirls about it. Sheila, could you imagine if I know this wouldn't happen. Imagine if you got invited on the CBC and you said something like that about Mark Carney. I have a feeling that David Cochrane wouldn't be laughing like that. And I have a feeling that you would not be invited back on the CBC if you did that about a Liberal leader. What do you think?
I think you could hear a pin drop after I had said something like that. But I'm from the prairies. We call what we just saw there a hen party. Usually involves middle-aged women with too much time on their hands, but apparently that's what amounts to a CBC panel these days. I wonder what that all cost us. Now, again, they're gossiping. This isn't news. This isn't journalism. This is gossiping. And again, I am skeptical now of everything Bob Fife says. And that again goes back to the debates, because he went on TV and he said that independent journalists, yours, mine, were in the debates scrum acting up and acting wild. Instead, we were the victims of ongoing workplace harassment at the hands of the CBC and the other journalists in the room. But he went on TV and completely lied. Gossiped again. Didn't know anything firsthand, just went on TV and gossiped. So now I know that about Bob Fife. I'm skeptical that any Conservative MP actually talked to him about what they were hearing at the door, because he just peddles in gossip third hand.
Right. And if you are an MP watching this and you're a Conservative, don't trust legacy media. Don't.
What
go
are you
to them
doing?
with your secrets, right? Like, just absolutely. Hopefully, the Conservatives will finally take the cue and just stop talking to the legacy media. I think Pierre Poilievre did a pretty good job of this, of just saying, like, you know what, I don't need you. I'm going to go talk to other people. All right, Sheila, I can't let you leave the show without just asking you very quickly about what's happening in Alberta. Last week, Premier Danielle Smith made changes to the Citizens Initiative Act, and you hear a lot of people online talking about referendum and independence for Alberta. So what's your take on this whole thing?
I think this is a long time coming. I've been around longer than I would like to admit. And the separatist movement in Alberta, it sort of ebbs and flows. The tide comes in and then the tide recedes. I know one of the biggest wet blankets on a separatist movement in Alberta was the election of Stephen Harper. Actually, it all sort of went away. And then it was rising when in the dying days of Rachel Notley's government, and then they got Jason Kenney and it all went away. And then it sort of came back when Jason Kenney wasn't exactly what everybody thought he would be. And then Danielle Smith came and it went away again. But you've got a lot of people in this province saying something has to change. There's a structural inequity that has gone back to the very beginning, where in Alberta we cannot vote blue any harder, with the exception of a couple of historically left-leaning ridings. Can't get any more conservative, and yet it gets us nowhere. And they do feel culturally incompatible with the rest of the country. They do feel like they are a distinct society out here. And I wouldn't say that they are wrong. Danielle Smith, I think, has done the right thing. She fixed a piece of legislation that was doomed to fail. It was their Citizen-Led Initiatives Act that, you had to overcome an absolutely insurmountable barrier within 90 days. She's rolled that back to 10% of the last election's number of people who voted, which I think is about 170,000 as opposed to 600,000 before, and extended the time to collect signatures from 90 days to 120. Now, I think this is fair. I think Alberta's future is whatever Albertans should so choose it to be. And I think Danielle Smith, without conceding that she's a separatist, and I don't think that she is, I think this gives people an opportunity to actually have their voice heard. And when you see it's like 30% of people are like, yeah, we'll go right now, thank you very much, without any overtures from the Americans to match our assets one for one. Once you start talking like that, I think that number just keeps going up and up. I think people write it off as fringe at their own peril.
Wow, I think you're right. I've known Premier Smith for a long time, and she's never struck me as a separatist in any way. However, she is someone with a lot of integrity who really, truly cares about Alberta, that will do whatever is best for Alberta, whatever it may be. So that's a story that we are keeping an eye on very closely. All right, Sheila. Well, thank you so much for your time, and great to have you this year. We'll have to have you on again soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Candice.
Right, that's Sheila Gunn Reid. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. Thank you and God bless.
You're watching Juno News, Canada's fastest growing independent news network. Our team works day and night to bring you nationwide coverage of the issues that matter. Honest reporting of the stories that put Canadians first. From far and wide, Juno is doing the work to turn the dial in the right direction, bringing you the news from the field and in the studio. Wherever it takes us, we get the job done. For you, for Canada. Subscribe today and help us replace the CBC. Go to junonews.com to join the fight.